Chapter 4. Art as Survival. In their years at Zonderwater, the Italian prisoners of war turned their place of imprisonment into a vibrant community. Desperate to stay busy, to fight loneliness and depression, they started programs in education, sport, and vocational training. They also took the opportunity of external work when it was allowed. These were essential to their overall health. Artistic endeavors flourished at Zonderwater and went on to have an impact on the artistic and cultural life of South Africa. But during the war, the ability to express their complex emotions was a matter of spiritual survival. It is important for us to remember that though we know the Second World War lasted from 1939 to 1945, there was no way for those young men to know how long they would be incarcerated, how long they would have a generous and enlightened camp commander, or if they would ever see Italy and their families again. Colonel Prinsloo, himself a former concentration camp survivor, fostered a spirit of community and productivity at Zonderwater. He encouraged creativity, allowing prisoners to express emotion, longing and hope through theater, art and music. Records of their work remain in museums, archives, private collections, and fading family memories. Theatre productions. Ex-prisoner of war Giovanni Albertini recalled that each of the blocks in Zonderwater ran and maintained its own theatre. Both spoken and musical lyric productions were staged. Among these were full costume operettas like The Geisha, Sidney Jones, 1896, The Maid of the Mountains, Fraser Simpson, 1916, The Merry Widow, Leha, 1905, Paesi dei Campanelli, Ranzato, 1926, presented in English and Italian. Staging these productions today is a major undertaking. Staging them in a prisoner of war camp was a miracle. Theatre professionals among the prisoners, such as wig setters, wardrobe specialists and directors, made lavish productions out of medical cotton wool for wigs and soot for makeup. And what they could not make, they asked for. The camp commander had to make the awkward request to Pretoria for a delivery of stockings for their prisoners of war actors. So sophisticated and so perfect was the staging and performance of these wonderful operettas that visiting Union Defence Force officers would ask to meet the leading ladies after the shows. Artists. With everything in short supply, creating artworks in a prisoner of war camp was a great challenge. Nevertheless, starting with the materials they had at hand, creative artists found ways to express themselves. Stories exist of artists taking parts of the canvas of their tents to create paintings that they could sell, and the artist Carlos Stoyer, born 1914, remembers using materials from the medical facilities to create stains, dyes, and paints for his works. Painting in the camp was the continuation of a career in oil painting for Carlos Stoyer, whose work is still part of the South African art scene. Eduardo Villa, born 1915, was another prominent artist emerging from among the prisoners of war. Trained in Italy, his collaborations with Italian South Africans after the war established his work as part of the public landscape of South African cities. With the Lupini Company, his figurative moldings in concrete are still visible on campuses and monuments around the country. He is most famous for his abstract bronzes, many of which were made in collaboration with the Vignali foundry, a company eventually taken over by ex-prisoners of war Vignali after the war. His early work in the camp was creating busts of prominent South Africans, including one of Colonel Prinsloo. Before his talent was spotted and commissioned, he sustained his need to express himself by working in melted and reconstituted soap. Musicians. The performing arts in South Africa also benefited from Italian prisoners of war talent and industry. The baritone and opera director Gregorio Fiasconaro became the first director of the University of Cape Town Opera School. Famous artists and musicians are one aspect of the culture of Zonderwater, and indeed there were many, but it is the amount and quality of the music in the camp during the war that is still amazing. In blocks 6, 9, and 8, there are the choirs, so well harmonized and instructed that they periodically tour other blocks. Directors of these choirs or founders are, respectively, Sergeant Mogno, Major Amarelli, and Lieutenant Bezio. At the first block, they have a wonderful Schola Cantorum of over 50 members, and the majority of comrades have heard the Missa Pontificalis of Perozzi for 3 voices with the band accompaniment, orchestrated by Maestro Mineo with a true artistic sense. A serious commitment to music extended to prisoners making their own instruments. Here, ingenuity was key, stealing hairs from the tail of a captain's horse for the bow, and using the very bench the Springbok sat on. The sly prisoner Passetti made a violin that he then sold back to the South African for £3. Here is the story that he set to verse, and some of the hand-drawn images. On a bench, the Springbok sits reading a paper. Meanwhile, behind him, a prisoner looks on. Look what's going on. The prisoner is a renowned luthier. He likes that bench and therefore seizes the opportunity. He risks, alas, the dangerous cause, and so, quietly, the scoundrel makes the bench disappear. With hammer and knife, he feverishly cuts and hammers, and after a few hours he finishes his work. Plucking the instrument, he comes to the decision that the violin is a bit dull. It sounds like a cat in love. And so cunningly, to make lots of money, he says, "This Stradivarius is an original." The Springbok says, "Good. It has a marvelous voice. Yes, I will pay £3 sterling. Very well." This story that I have told is an original story that happened to a certain person, and that person is me.